Who among us, by simply worrying, could add a single hour to our lives? Since we cannot do this very little thing, why should we worry about the rest? Luke, the 12th chapter, verses 25 and 26. In the current political climate, there are virtually zero media outlets attempting to relate information that brings peace. I would like to be an exception to that. In today's video, I would like to share with you something that's going on currently in the world, in contrast to something that happened historically. And by looking at both of these events, I think we can say clearly that now is a time for rejoicing. I'm sure a lot of people are probably already scratching their heads. How can you say that? Haven't you read this headline or that headline? There's a verse in the Bible in Revelation that talks about a pale horse. Writer's name was Death and Hades. I'm sure a lot of you have read Revelation 6, verses 7 and 8. What most people don't talk about, though, is what happens next. You see, that's the key. Now, event number 1 is happening currently in India. Indian hospitals turn away patients in COVID-19's tsunami. It's getting very, very bad there. India is a very different place. They have 1.3 billion people in a country not much bigger than Texas. 4 times our population. But they have held on to some old ways of doing things in India that we let go a long time ago in this country. I'm sure many people remember in the early 1300s the arrival of the Black Death in Europe, the bubonic plague. Now, it wasn't just one event in Europe. It came and it went, and then it came again, and then it went. And every so many years, they would have these events where people started dying of it, and then it would stop. And there were all sorts of theories about what brought it on and what made it go away, the vast majority of which were complete wives' tales. They were absolutely inaccurate. But one thing that people learned to do was to stay away from each other in ways that they didn't before. All the way back in the 14th century, they didn't understand that, meaning the scientific aspect of that, but they did understand the effect of it. They understood the importance of keeping a distance and disinfecting. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are like, what does this have to do with what's going on now? Well, the world changed because of this permanently in ways that we just accept as normal now. There are things we do now that would have been seen as very strange back then. People used to dump human waste in the streets. They used to relieve themselves in stairwells. They never understood. They didn't put the two things together, that was unsanitary. Now we have indoor plumbing. Now we have all sorts of hygiene that we do on a daily basis. We brush our teeth at least once a day, most people, sometimes more. Bathe with soap and water. Wash our hands. There's things we don't touch with our bare hands without washing them. We don't handle deceased animals, for example, or anything else. I'll just leave that to your imagination. You know what I'm talking about. Now, this was the thing that people don't talk about. Eventually, people realize, like, you know what? Our best bet is to go build a house in the countryside and just get out of the city. See, India is largely populated in very large cities where people are crammed together, much like medieval Europe was. They did that for economic advantage and for convenience, not realizing that they were setting themselves up for an event like this. And where have we seen in our country the biggest outbreaks? Up north in the big cities. In places like Florida, where people are more spread out. I know a lot of people don't think that's the case, but that is the case. It hasn't been as bad, and this has historically been the case. But the next level is when societies and cultures gravitate away from living in big cities and living together communally, they become more independent and freedom-minded. They left Europe not just because of the king, or kings, plural, kings and queens. The French had a king, the Spanish had a king, the English had a king. We always hear the story about the King of England and the American Revolution and taxation without representation and all that good stuff. But there were areas that were primarily controlled by the Spanish, areas controlled by the French, and I'm sure they each had their own specific problem with each of their particular rulers. So the idea of wanting more space, of wanting more distance, because of things like what happened in Europe, leads to a cultural shift toward conservatism, toward Christian value, not away from it. And this is what's happening now. We had gone through a period where we started to gravitate back toward the cities. And people, put themselves in very close proximity to each other for economic advantage. But then we see an event like this rolls around, and the housing market across the country, especially in Florida, is exploding. There's not enough houses for the people who want them. And the left hates this idea. They loathe it with a passion because they know what's coming. Because it's just the way culture works. When you gravitate away from communal living to more independent living, you become more independent-minded, you become more conservative, and you vote that way. Now, they didn't have the ability to vote back then, but it still made society better. Sorry about the angle here. I just wanted to show this because Florida, during the Revolution, was still under Spanish control. Virtually all of the Midwest and the West was under French control. Then there were the southern states and the middle states, middle colonies, and New England. And they had very different values. But this was a direct result of the continual arrival and waning series of Black Death events that hit Europe. This was a big driver of people to the New World. I mean, think about it. There were no guarantees in the New World. There was no law in the, not really enforceable law in the colonies. I mean, they're maybe up in New England, perhaps in Virginia, but you get out into the Carolinas and out into French territory, there was no real law. There was no guarantees. There were no checks waiting for anyone. Why would you leave someplace where there were assets that could make your life better to someplace where you could just be gone and no one would know whatever happened to you in this strange new world that many people didn't even have maps to? We know more about the surface of Mars than the colonists knew about the New World. Even with British ships, it was a 2-week journey. So this is where I wanted to go with this. This is the reality. Now, we are coming into a time in history where the value system is moving incredibly to the right. Oklahoma has just passed laws. Nebraska, we've gone through all of the states that have gone directly against the belief system of those occupying Washington, D.C. right now. From Montana all the way to Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, you name the states. Second Amendment sanctuaries in Oklahoma and Nebraska. We just passed a bunch of really great measures down here protecting people. And it's just been 3 months since the new administration and only a year since the event happened back in 2020. And we've already seen this massive shift. It's going to continue. It's going to continue across the country and around the world. But definitely pray for those in India because things are looking kind of rough over there. But it's instructive because they are holding on to the old British European way of doing things. And that's what's causing their problem. So, anyway, God bless. Have a great weekend. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next time.